All right. Sorry about that. Lost you for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and get started.
Stephanie, can you see if you can find it on YouTube? I can't find it. Nurturing our roots.
Live. Good evening. Welcome to Nurturing Our Roots. This is your host, Antoinette. I'm very happy to be here tonight. I am truly excited about my guest that I am going to interview and talk with. Let me just pull up something a minute. Just give me 1 minute. Sorry about the little difficulties that we had before, but that's okay. That's technology. It'll work out anyway. Let me just stop sharing for a moment and tell you more about the person that we'll be talking to tonight. All right, got it, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Here it is. We will be talking to one of the descendants of Lewis Allen. We'll be talking with Louis Ali, who is named for his grandfather. This story caught my attention several years ago. I learned of the murder that took place at the Amite Cotton Gin in Amite County, Mississippi in 1964. This case sat on my desk for 20 years. And let me just say this to you all. I was receiving an award, and this award was never important to me as this phone call that I received from this young man who said that I am the grandson of Lewis Allen and Crawford Allen. I just couldn't believe it. So at that time, you know what I had to do. I had to stop and talk with him. So I would like for you all to welcome my very special guest tonight as we talk about his family and some of the research that we did just recently. Hello, Louis. How are you?
How you doing, Dr. Harold? I really appreciate you allowing us to come on the show this afternoon. Thank you for
I
having me.
am so happy to have you as a guest because you and we did some research about 3 weeks ago, and I was very happy that I had that experience to travel with you to Amite County, Mississippi to research your Allen family. Now, am I correct in saying that most of your Allen family came out of Amite County, Mississippi?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, wonderful. I just want to pull this up where everybody can really follow us along. Okay. The Allen family history presented by Louis Ali. And I see you are all into those records, huh?
Absolutely. Incredible experience.
Had you ever researched before in the courthouse for your Allen family history?
No, not to that extent. Some, but just not to that extent that me and you went.
Well, I am happy to hear that. Okay. So, in this segment, what we'll be talking about, what we'll be discussing is finding the Allen family in the Amite County Courthouse, stories that my grandmother told me, because that's very important. Because a lot of the information you have now is because your grandmother passed a lot of history down to you. Am I correct?
Absolutely. My
Mm.
grandmother, Elizabeth, who raised me, was like the queen of oral history and all the stuff that happened with the Allens and my grandfather, particularly. She just kept it going. I guess it's just showing you the value of a good, decent, loyal, militant, yet feminine Black woman.
Wow. Wow. I just want to say, if you don't know your family history, then you don't know yourself. And I am being honest when I say that. Without knowing your family history, you do not know yourself. Let's start off with Crawford Allen, if you don't mind, and we're going to briefly talk about Crawford because we are producing a documentary that will be featured Juneteenth to talk about Crawford Allen, who was born in 1869. He died in 1971 in Louisiana. There's something about Lewis Allen's father, Crawford Allen, that I want to share with you all briefly. Is the fact that Crawford Allen, his wife, and his three children was sold for $20 in 1926. So when I looked at the census, Lewis, I saw that other child, Morris, in the house. Do you see it?
Yes.
I saw him in the house. Um, Lewis, was that the very first time that you had heard that your grandfather was one of the children in the house that was sold with Crawford Allen?
Yes, that was the first time that we found out about that part of our history. We didn't know it. My father's father just said to my father that Papa was a slave, but we thought that he was born into slavery, like, you know, but it was a lot deeper than that after we found the research.
Wow. So you had no idea that he was kidnapped. And
No
so,
idea. We had no idea that he was kidnapped and brought to Kentwood, Louisiana. We didn't know that part.
I remember your dad saying he mentioned that Papa was sold. They sold Papa, but he never mentioned that he was one of the children that was in that household.
No, he didn't. He didn't. And I
So,
can imagine how much that traumatized my grandfather, going through all that he went through in his life, plus that. You know?
and for your family today to know that, okay, slavery exists, but now you're looking at slavery in your family in the 20th century. Your grandfather and your two aunts.
Right. And these are people, well, I knew my aunts very well, Aunt Elma and Aunt Tilly, and I knew Aunt Sue also. And to know somebody that was actually enslaved gives you a whole nother understanding of it. Really, like they were taken like prisoners of war, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a whole nother angle to look at reparations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because this
Yeah.
is something that happened as long ago as people would like to think.
Yes, yes. And to know that your family, I mean, your aunt, your grandfather, and Louis, I just want to say, when I first laid my eyes on a picture of your great grandfather Crawford and his wife Anna, I just felt like I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I was actually looking at a photograph of the people who was sold and who was mentioned in these articles, who was mentioned in the newspaper clipping. I was actually looking at them. I never thought I would see a photograph. Mm.
And to go through all of that and still be a very proud people, because the Allens from a very proud lineage and heritage, because they're basically property owners and very land literate. And anywhere they went, they were able to produce something on the land. So to come out to have been enslaved and then recaptured again as basically a prisoner of war, a slave, and then to still have a proud the quorum is saying a lot about my ancestors, you know?
The Allen family has been through so much, and I feel like, I'm still learning a lot. And when you took me to the place where your grandfather Lewis was murdered, um, and I have to share this with you about that moment, that evening when you took me there. I was just in shock to know that underneath me on the ground was the place where your grandfather's life ended in a vicious, violent way. You know, it's like I wanted to get out and I wanted to stand on the saw, but at the same time, I was feeling like, to me, it was something like sacred ground. You know, I'm standing on a place where this person was actually took his last breath. His life was taken away, and to know your father, who's sitting there holding his grandparents' photographs, is the person who found him and actually had to pick up some of his brain, from the gunshot wounds.
Yeah.
What is the name of this place? I'm looking at this sign here. What is the name of that place?
You can tell the kind of pride my grandfather had, because the name of that place and that sign there is called Huckleberry Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And the terrain of the property there just rose like Mississippi hills. The dirt's pretty, he kept it fine. He farmed, he logged there. And in 1953, he bought the place. And the Allens were on the up climb again, you know. He bought my father a new car, bought his other son a new car. They were doing well for themselves until he witnessed that murder or outright lynching of Mr. Herbert Lee at the cotton gin in 1961. But in 1953, the Allens were living really good off the land, you know, and they were living self-sufficient during that time. And so that was a real happy time when he bought that place for he and my grandmother. They made a life for themselves. It was quiet as it's kept. He even built a place there for his mother and father, Papa Crawford and Mama Anna. Anna. So they all lived there together, which Allens would do. They love to live in close proximity to one another.
Did you have the opportunity to meet your grandfather Crawford since he died in 1971? That was during your life, your lifetime. Did you meet him?
And I met him only through my grandmother's lens, who would keep up with that, because the family, when my grandfather was murdered in 1964, left immediately afterwards. Mm-hmm. And I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, lived there till I was 9 years old. And my grandmother would keep the stories going and tell us about Papa Crawford, but I never got the opportunity to meet him in 1971, and I was born in 67.
Mm-hmm. So you was a little boy at that time, but I can only imagine, I was 11 years old, and just to know that here it is, this man, his story that's set on my desk. Oh my God, I would have so many stories for him, so many questions for him right now, but that's just the circumstances. The courthouse research, I just want to go to the fact that the courthouse research, identify the courthouse to research what can I find in the courthouse, cemeteries, identifying the family, cemeteries, the oral history in our family. And this is a picture of Lewis Allen, your namesake. So Lewis, your grandfather, Lewis Allen, he was a man with some kind of means. Am I correct here?
Yeah. The Allens taught land literacy. And so we sort of live off the land and make our living. applying our skills to the land. There's no piece of equipment that my grandfather couldn't operate, and there's no piece of equipment that I can't operate, or my 35-year-old son or the younger boys are learning it now. And they were into farming, logging, building, even Crawford work, building roads, streets, roads, doing what they call today infrastructure work, but just living off the land. And this skill and trade is from
in your family today.
this very moment, and that's how we basically earn a living. So the that's the happy part of it, that we were able to keep the trade going. Sadly, when people are murdered in your family, you can't get the inheritance or reap the benefits years of their hard labor and sacrifice. Law institutions don't protect a man who was a World War II veteran, a man who paid taxes, a man who was really a upstanding citizen. That's the painful part, because the heirs can't reap the benefits of their ancestors' hard work, and we have to start over and over and over again.
All the time. I want to first give a warm-hearted thank you to my dear friend and colleague, Bernice Bennett, who have taken on the cause of researching the Black homesteaders throughout the United States. And in Mississippi, we found your ancestor, Sailor Allen, who was born in 1826 in Amite County, Mississippi. According to the 1870 United States Federal Census, he was a farm laborer. He married Louise, who was born in 1835 in Kentucky, in 1850 in Amite County, Mississippi. Sailor and Louisa had two children living in the house, Isadora Allen and Eli Allen. And if you look at it, Sailor submitted his homestead application number 4237 on August the 1st, 1870 at the Homestead Land Office in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, listen to this. He couldn't read, all right, but he made his mark and he paid his $7 filing fee for his landlords.
That gives me chills, because that $7 filing fee that he paid, if memory serves me well, they were paying 50 cents an acre for, and this is all part of land literacy, to clear an acre of land. And you had to do it by hand with a cane knife. And see, and this, not getting far away from your subject, but just imagine clearing an acre of land, 50 cents an acre. In order to scrap up $7, you'd have to clear 14 acres. Well, an acre is about 207 feet, approximately 208 feet by 208 feet. Just imagine what that looks like if you got to clear 14 acres to get $7 to file a fee. How long did it take him? And oftentimes, this is when you underbrush land. But just imagine, because whenever whites would allow you to be on land during that time, they would force you on land where there were a lot of pine trees, because pine trees have tap roots, which make it even harder to aerate the soil underneath the trees in order to plant a garden and have a homestead. That's an incredible perseverance to still get that land in 1870. I'm just, we have a reason. We really don't have a reason to quit.
We really don't, and my girlfriend, I want to keep in mind that she has a book coming out. It should be out this summer or early fall, but we're hoping that it's summer. And I think, Louis, that you should purchase a copy of her book to have Seller's story, which will be a part of her book, The
Gotta
Black
get it. Gotta get
Homesteaders.
it
Homestead.
autographed.
That's right. And look, and I want to say this, I want to point out during the period, the required period as a homesteader, Seller cleared, plowed, fenced about 60 acres of land. He built one dwelling house, a kitchen, a smokehouse, a corn crib, a cotton house, and a shop. So there you know exactly what he owned. And in his final proof required witnesses, you see the witnesses that witnessed for him in 1876, and they attested that they had known Seller for 15 years.
Wow.
You should be ever so proud of your Allen family. And I will be happy to send that to you. But I do want to pull up some of the photographs that I was taking in the courthouse with you. Let's just start off with the first one. Here it is. You are intense, Louis. If you look at it, you are in those records.
Yeah.
What did you find? Let's talk about some of the records that you found.
Well, I've always been somebody who had a deep imagination.
Uh-huh.
I was calling out the ancestors' names and looking there with you.
Uh-huh.
I was just thinking about, and finding their marriage certificates. We bought the information to have a marriage certificate from a great ancestor, who they married, the date they married, how old they were when they got married, following the patterns of the consistency of names that's been in the family long before my grandfather. The name keeps coming up, Morris Allen, Crawford,
Yes.
Jesse Allen, Spencer Allen.
Mm-hmm.
All of these names just kept coming up. And then to be able to look in the courthouse and see the pattern of how they marry women. That was the type of women that they fell in love with and married.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the main things they wanted to do after so-called slavery ended, was to have the opportunity to get married and to leave an inheritance. And I can see a lot of the spirit, explains a lot about myself in hearing a lot of the history of what they done, who they married, Dr. Harold. I couldn't tell you how grateful my family is and how grateful we are to you for really lighting the fuse to explode something within our beings to make us even more proud of what we have done and what God is going to bless us to do. So,
well, it's a pleasure. And like I said, Louis, that case sat on my desk for 20 years. And when you phoned me, if there was a such thing that I could scream, I wanted to scream, because you couldn't imagine in my lifetime, because it was there. Crawford Allen's story was always there. And to meet you, and it's been a year and a half now, and we are doing amazing things together in this research. And I'm looking at this book that you're holding, the marriage book that was separated by color. Was you surprised to see that the marriages were separated during that time?
No, because I know history well enough to know that it was separated. But to be honest about it, I was just grateful. I was in the moment of just gratitude that you could skillfully show me how to navigate to actually find the information. And I'm sharing the information with my family members, and they are all excited. I'm sure some of them are probably watching this, but they're all excited to learn even more about our history. And it's one thing, quick point, it's one thing to have oral history, and my wife Stephanie always says this. It's great that the oral history was passed down from my grandmother, my father, and others. But it does something else when you can actually find the documentation and marry the documentation onto the oral history.
Yes, yes.
You know.
And I understand what you're saying, because my mother had the oral history, but when I was able to research in my time the documents, and like you said, marry the documents to the oral history, then it became a
Living
powerful force. Yes. So yes, yes, yes. And I want to say to you, thank you for taking me to the grave sites of Crawford and Lewis Allen and Anna and Susie and Elmira. Just thank you, because I felt like when I had to touch that headstone. I just had to touch it, because I said, here it is. I met his story in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives. Yes, I researched it with Ancestry, and it wasn't until Eric Williams, a mutual relative that both of us have,
right.
he called me up on the phone. He said, Antoinette, you do know who that is, huh? I said, no. He said, wait a minute. Do you know that is the Lewis Allen who was murdered in 1964? Do you realize that's Crawford Allen's son? I said, wait a minute, let me have a seat right now, because you're giving me some information. He said, yes, that's him. That is the Lewis.
That's right.
And that's how I made those connections. But this picture that I'm pulling up of you right now, this photograph, it's one of my favorites, because as you kneel down and you are feeling the inscription of your ancestor's name, it's like he really cared. He's into it.
Yeah.
And you took your time. You took your time. Lois, why do you think that learning how to research in the courthouse is very important?
Of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. Yesterday is the foundation we stand on today, and what we do today affects future generations. When you don't really know your history, you don't have an identity.
Mm-hmm.
And without an identity, you don't have a purpose. And without a purpose, you don't have a meaningful function. And you just mentioned Brother Eric, my cousin, your cousin.
Mm-hmm.
But think of how many Black people are out there killing family members and don't even know it.
And don't even know they're related, yes.
We don't even know how we're related, and we're hurting each other. Our self-esteem often is at a very low vibration and a low frequency, because we don't know what we came from. And we don't know how much our ancestors sacrificed in order to get us where we are today. So believe it or not, doing this research shows Black people just how much we have to live for, and how much we should deny ourselves, the lower self, in order to allow the ancestors' energy and spirit to live through us, to complete the work that they started. We wouldn't be motivated to complete the work if we didn't even know what the work is or was.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not only am I grateful to have gone to the courthouse, and all of those books were so heavy. Those were not you couldn't be no lightweight to pick those.
That's right.
We had to climb up the ceiling, down the ceiling to get a good workout in to go through all of the books. And you have to do it and be patient.
That's right.
Talking about an entire life, I couldn't just run through that information. I needed to really absorb not just what they wrote, but what was the circumstances surrounding when. What is the context of their life. And so I was like you, I was trying to feel the vibration of the ancestors so that I could really understand what they've been through and more about what my purpose is in life.
It gave you another purpose, huh?
It gave me a much higher purpose, I believe. In fact, I was telling one of my close friends about my experience there,
Uh-huh.
and he lives in DC. And he told me how blessed I was to have that opportunity, but he went on to tell me, you are your grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to learn everything you can about him so that you can complete the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He would have never said that. And he really wished that you'd come to Washington, D.C. and take him by the hand like you took me by the hand. Everybody want to hold Dr. Antoinette's hand.
And when you mention those books, as I sit there and I watched you, and I'm a very good observer, and I said, he's going to get the energy from me that he put in it. Because it's one thing for me to teach you and to guide you, but I had to feel the sense that you was thirsty, that you was hungry, that you wanted it. And I said, okay, so he wants it. So feed him just a little bit and then keep on feeding him, because you see, he didn't mind climbing up those stairs to get the book. Because I just think with me on crutches trying to get those 30-pound books, those 30-pound books. But it was for me to guide you once you got the book.
Yes, ma'am. That you did.
The weight of your ancestors was upon you. And you learned so much about the Allen family with a relationship with land ownership. So it helped to give you an understanding about yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I was looking to see if I had it here, but you showed me a document when we were there. A section of land is 640 acres.
Mm-hmm.
And the land that the Allens control is bordered right through Choctaw territory. I mean, when I seen that, I was blown away, because it has been passed down through oral history that we married into the Choctaw and they married us, but we original, we just all Black folk.
There it is.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And
I knew you was gonna talk about that for some reason. Let me go ahead and pull that up.
That was just like a huge highlight for me, because that name Choctaw keeps popping up. And the relationship we have with indigenous people, we are indigenous, we are original people. Mm-hmm. But to see that the Allens, that's where their property was. Now, back in the early 1920s, my grandmother would tell me stories about how people from Liberty and Gloucester, how the whites there would tell the ones from Gloucester to get back across the creek. Remember when we were riding down that street and I was telling you?
Yes.
The creek.
I remember. Go
that
on.
area there, I can't really point to it, but you can see it on the map, is where a lot of the Choctaw would be, right there by that creek, crossing over from Gloucester into Liberty. But the Allens were so land literate, and then you see all these documents of the Allens, and this is in the 1800s, buying and selling land more than we are today, practically.
And opening up successions. Let me point that out too, because
they were business people.
There was business people, because when you talk about you opening up a succession when somebody passes away in this day and time, maybe 5 and 6 people can pass away in the family and there still haven't been a succession open up
So
on that
sad.
individual to pass it down, pass the heir property down the way that it is. So why was it in that period in time that people who couldn't read, who couldn't write, who made their mark, had more business sense than people with 2 degrees, can read and write, but not taking care of business? Explain that to me, Louis.
Well, see, they were land literate.
Uh-huh.
Today, most of us are land illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted the 40 acres and a mule so that they could produce for themselves and be self-sufficient. They did not want to be dependent on nobody. And now they've made us into a type of people where we think we're dependents, whereas they wanted to be independent. They've given us a so-called education that is mostly cultural training, and they've robbed us of our cultural identity from yesteryears. And this is why families are not as close as they used to be. Think about what it would take to gain 640 acres of land and to know how to enter into international trade with people, Choctaw, who may have had a little bit of a different cultural expression than you. When we don't even know how to get along with people 2 blocks from us, they were actually trading. You can't trade if you don't produce nothing. So the surplus of what they were producing, they traded with others. A lot of times it wasn't all about money. Black people bartered with one another. Mm-hmm. They lived close to one another. If Dr. Antoinette has eggs and I have sugar,
we trade up.
Trade. And the medium of exchange was the honesty and integrity that we had by you giving me the dozen of eggs that you said that you'd give, and I gave you the pound of sugar.
Because your word and our word meant something.
It was our bond.
It was our bond. Now, when you say Gloucester, Mississippi, Gloucester, and I want everybody to understand, Gloucester is a small community within Amite County, Mississippi.
Absolutely.
Right outside of the county. Liberty, Mississippi.
Right.
So when you told me they walked from Star Hill community, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. These are not my grandparents. These are my great grandparents. Anna and Crawford. They would walk up to Liberty like it wasn't nothing. Sometimes twice a day, my dad.
And I took that ride with you. I'm like, huh? They walked. Oh my goodness.
They would walk, and my great grandmother had a bad leg, but she would walk on it. She's a tall woman. When I say tall, maybe my wife's height, 5'10", and they walked until my grandfather built them a house on their place, and they all got along good. My grandmother would tell me stories about my great grandmother's food etiquette. But my grandmother didn't like nobody going in the kitchen, going in her pots.
Yeah, that's where that comes from. Could you call her name out? Call your grandmother's name out so people can know what grandmother you're talking about. What's her name?
My great grandmother was Anna.
Anna, yes. And that's who passed the oral history down to you, was Anna?
No, it was Elizabeth Allen, my grandmother's name. Anna was the great grandmother.
Okay, so Louis Allen's wife, Anna. Elizabeth, I'm sorry.
Crawford Allen's wife, Anna. My grandmother, Elizabeth Allen, she was Louis Allen's wife.
And so that's who you spent the time with, was Elizabeth, your grandmother Elizabeth?
Yes. In fact,
and so she told all this information to you. She pulled it inside of you.
Yeah, and I know it was very intentional. She had sayings. One of her sayings was, she never met an Allen that was lazy. they're very industrious. And she would say that she's gonna make sure that I wasn't part of the first generation of lazy Allens.
Really?
She,
You was the first child born in that family coming out of your dad's family? Was you the first grandchild?
the first grandson
The first grandson. That's why she was
that we
like,
knew of
okay.
at the time. Yes, yeah,
Is she buried in that cemetery in Star Hill?
absolutely.
Yes.
Right next to her husband, Lewis.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
my grandmother was cut from a different era and a different ilk. And I don't want to go off to a tangent, but I gotta say this here. Those Black women were so loyal, and
Mhm.
you really ain't living until you met a loyal Black woman. And I don't know if we really know today of the extent of the Black woman in previous generations' loyalty. But you got to understand, when my grandfather was murdered, my grandmother was a young 42-year-old woman with all of the things that come with being a 42-year-old Black woman. And she was used to having nice things because her husband bought her nice things, and they went down to poverty without a breadwinner. And my grandmother told me stories of my grandfather and his family and the men in her family every day. And she absolutely loved him to the day that she departed, February 28, 1991. And so what it does when a Black woman holds on to the history, the culture, and I told you, you remind me of my grandmother, holding on to the history and the culture, it's like you imbue the spirit and anoint the spirit of the ancestors on the next generation of young men so that they can actually become men. And let me tell you what she told me. She said she knew men and a man so well, she could make a man. I'm telling you what she said.
Wow.
I just can't breathe the breath of life in him, but I can make him. And if she was here today, I would tell her, you know what, Medea? We called her Medea. You were right. You made us love a man who wasn't physically present anymore. You made us love the ancestors who were not physically present anymore. And what more could you want from a woman than for her to extend your life and put you into the next dispensation of time?
Isn't that something?
Nobody could do that better than these type of Black women. And I'm not somebody who gasses women up. I don't say that to no any woman. I'm saying it because I don't think that sisters today know the power that was displayed in previous generations of Black women. These Black women were the wind beneath my grandfather, my
Right.
great grandfather, and all the men's wings in my family. And really, if I told the truth, my wife is like that today. You know?
Yeah. No, tell the truth, because this is what we need to hear. And I remember you contacting me, you texted me, you said my grandmother, because my father don't really talk about all this. It's my grandmother who kept the history going. It's my grandmother who just made me know so much about my grandfather as if I had met my grandfather Lewis, you know. And so certainly we have to honor her memories and honor what she passed down, because if it had not been for the oral history passed down by your grandmother, you would not have known.
Right. And she was so loyal. There's a family member when the family was fleeing out of Mississippi. This Rosemary Allen was married to Morris Allen, but they got a divorce and she had many children. But when our family left out of Mississippi, she opened up her doors to my grandmother. And I got a picture. I have a little altar at my home, and I have Rosemary Allen's picture there. And whenever I call on the ancestors or think about them, I think about these women when the Allens got into turmoil, because you got to understand, there's been several episodes in history where the Allens' land was They wanted to take our land, and in many cases we fought. But when we had to flee, it's the Allen women that tell the story that make the younger Allen boys and Allens come back and rebuild again. It's like knocking down a bee nest or wasp nest. The queen bees get
Mm-hmm.
the bees back together, and we rebuild what we have or had again in another dispensation of time. So these Allen women were no joke. They were the kind of women that if you killed their husband or something happened to their husband, they're not going to easily forget them. And they're going to put that spirit in the other Allens or other children that are coming behind them. And really, your work, Dr. Harold, has made the ancestors live again and made families of people who didn't know anything about themselves. See, the Black woman's power is in her ability to influence. Influence is greater than power because power is not permanent. We are recharged through the woman. And this is why the enemy wants to attack and destroy the sacred spirituality of Black women. And I tell you, what you're doing will literally bring and wake up Black America again. And that's why I think that I'm grateful for you allowing me on. I'm grateful for all you've done for our family. But I know your stance and I know what it represents for the nation or the race of people that we come from. We have to have women that give us a legacy. And you can't have a legacy if you don't have an identity.
Thank you so much for that. And I received that to certainly to I receive it. And I want to say to you that one of my favorite sayings is it's the past that shapes the present and the
Absolutely.
present that shapes the future.
That's
And
absolutely.
we owe it to our ancestors, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children, we owe it to those that is yet unborn to tell our history, to first research it. Looking at you researching in that courthouse, and a couple of days prior to that, I was looking at a woman named Lynn Dorsey researching. And at the end of my week with both of you all, I felt honored and proud to know that both of you all was walking out of there with new information that you had no idea about your family. And I felt somewhat like in the spirit of Harriet Tubman when she was taking uh, our people to freedom. I felt like I was taking the children back, the descendants of those who wanted to go back and fetch the best that the past had to educate them, offer them, and share with them. Here is, as they would say, your daddy's records. Here is your ancestors' records. So it was a pleasure, and not to mention that my Harrell family come out of Amite County, Mississippi. My Harrell family come out of East Feliciana. So it wouldn't be surprisingly to me if I found that the Allens and the Harrells in some way down the line was marrying into each other. You see, because that's how those things was happening back in that period in time. But I want you to really comment on how important is the study of family history, not only to yourself, but should be to everybody else.
Every family should have a family historian. Every family should have somebody who documents family history and takes photographs and videos and interviews. You notice that we don't have as many family reunions as we used to.
Mm-hmm.
They're not as big, and this is even before COVID. We got to get back to that. And see, a lot of times around these family get-togethers, which I know you're going to have a big one soon.
Mm-hmm.
We get to find out a lot about one another, and it brings the family closer together. You cannot be a family without understanding family history.
Mhm.
I'm saying it again about legacy. What is the legacy of the Harolds, of the Allens, of the Alis? Where do you get your strength from if you feel like your family never did nothing? See, I'll never feel like that
Mhm.
because of my grandmother, because of you. I'll never feel like I can't do nothing. But when you have a little black boy or a little girl or any human being, and they don't know anything about their contribution to the onward march of civilization, then it tears the self-esteem down. See, like when you see a person, they running around with their pants down to their knees, can't have a conversation without profanity, very violent. Any little infraction could make them pull out a pistol and shoot and kill other human beings. This is a person who doesn't have an identity. See, what you do is really, it's more than just history. It has a spiritual and a medicinal component to what you do that heals you from the spirit and the soul and then moves out to your exterior. You actually boost your own self-esteem and other people's self-esteem and image of themselves by allowing them to learn their rich history and culture. And this is not something that school teachers alone should be responsible for.
Mhm.
What you teach is something that every individual has to take upon themselves, and the parents have to get involved in making sure that their children have a good self-image in knowing their genealogy.
And that's so important because, when we think about, if we look at the media and what the media has done
Image.
and what the media has undocumented about our families, our communities,
That's right.
our our existence, those stories are our stories. So therefore, who should be telling these stories? Who should be researching these stories? When I think about the time and the place when we was robbed of the abilities to read and write. So what is our excuse now? And let me just say this here, because I have to say this before we close out. We can talk about, and we hear people do this all the time. They can talk about the celebrities, their children, their wives, their fathers, the mother's name, but cannot call the name of their grandfather or the grandmother who may not have been that celebrity. They may have been that person to have survived the harsh treatment in the cotton field or the big house or those lynchings or those things that really could have just made them just lose their mind. Those are the true heroes and the true sheroes whose shoulders we stand on. It's
Right.
a disgrace, it's a dishonor for us not to talk about them or not to pass on our family history as it relates to those things, those triumphs they came through, those challenges. And so family history, the study of family history, is that one key
That's right.
that help you to understand yourself.
That's right.
It's that one key that says, okay, I'm going to extract the best from that. And those things that need to be changed, I'm going to change that. Because you know what? Because I have looked at my family through the lens of a microscope and say, no, we need to do away with this, but
That's
we need
right.
to enhance this.
That's right. That is so powerful.
And that's a true statement. We're going to do away with those things that didn't work, but we're going to build up on those things in our family that kept us together, that educated us. We stuck together as family. How do we go back and reclaim our families? Because you see, we're living in a time where we're competing with all the social media sites. Our young people are not into family like they once used to be, like we used to be.
That's
How do we
right.
go back and reclaim? We got to reclaim.
That's
Because if we don't reclaim, we losing. You see, the Allens reclaim land literacy. When I look at you and your sons and all your equipment and all these things, because for generations and generations, the Allen family understood and still understand the power of owning land, something that they're not making anymore.
right. That's right. And that's the very reason why we always say land literacy for all the land illiterates.
Yes.
But you made such a point. There are things that we can undo, mistakes we could have made. And there's a science called epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
But there's epigenetics in just your physical being, but there's epigenetics also in your spiritual being.
Mm-hmm.
And I ain't even gonna get into, religion, but there is a reason why we repent and atone.
Mm-hmm.
And if God has blessed us to be here now, then there are things that we can do right now that can affect the future and make a better world for people coming behind us. And really, that's the purpose of life, to make it better for those that come behind you. That's, every generation should want to make it better. And we used to talk like that we wanted to make it better for our children. We wanted to make it better for our wives. We wanted to make it better for our husbands. We wanted to make a better world. You can't spread an idea if you don't make it public. Because if you don't make it public, you can't make it contagious. That's why we need forums like what you've created here, to where when other people hear it, then they can go back and start looking at their roots and then prune nurturing our roots.
Mm-hmm.
Nurturing our roots, feeding our roots that feed our spirit.
Mm-hmm.
We have to go and nurture our roots. If you can't honor your ancestors, you certainly can't honor your mother and father. And see, that part of the reason why Black men in particular are so disrespected, and Black people in general, is because our children don't know what we built or what we've done. In order to see, when you built something and you've done something, people look at you with respect. But if they feel like you ain't never did nothing and you ain't doing nothing, then it's easy. They got a real nasty saying in our community: an end ain't nothing, ain't gonna be nothing, and on and on and on with a bunch of negative.
That is not true.
That's so false.
That is so far. And so that's why nurturing our roots is exactly what it is. And our motto is from slavery to freedom. And so we must talk about our family history. We must uplift our family history. And I can't say to you enough how much I appreciate you calling your ancestors' names out, going back to the courthouse, because you owe them that. Because most of the documents that you saw, they made their X. They couldn't read or write. And so here you're coming after that, and you're able to read those documents. You're able to transcribe those documents. And I'm not going to stop until I see Louis Ali publish a book on the Allen family. That's on my radar, to make sure you do that, so that your offsprings, your nieces and your nephews and everybody understand where that foundation came from. Your family came out of those shackles, and when they broke free of those shackles, they took off running as if slavery never affected them, because they had a vision not only for themselves, but for their families, for their wives and their husbands. They wanted better. And so we have to build on that foundation to let our children know you come from greatness, and I expect nothing less from you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Nothing less from you.
Yes,
And you cannot know. And earlier when I said, if you don't know your family history, you don't know yourself.
no.
Get to know yourself. And
That's
when you
right.
get to know yourself, introduce yourself to your family history, not by what somebody else said, but by what Lewis are researching in the courthouse himself. What
That's
Lewis
right.
are taken from the oral history that was given, passed down to you by your grandmother, Elizabeth Allen.
Right.
And you married the documents to the oral history.
Absolutely. And it was like an explosion.
Yes, it was.
Like,
And I expect for that explosion to be that in the form of a book, that in the form of a documentary, that in the forms of panel discussions, because you're going to keep their memory alive. You're going to keep their legacy, and you're going to continue to build on that legacy. So much that you're going to frame what all of that land looked like in numbers for them. You're going to frame it in the form of a map to say, this is what the Allen family did, regardless of they couldn't read or write, but they had the ingenuity, they had the wisdom and the guidance to build, to keep building. So when we come along in our time, we got to keep building and keep building, not destroying, but to keep building, because you was given something to build upon.
receive it, receive it, receive it, believe it. Thank you, Dr. Harrell.
Well, it's been a pleasure working with you. I look forward to a continuation of that. And in June, I am planning something where what I am working on right now before we close out, I'm working on getting everyone in the circle of what we do to come together. Those from Amite County, Mississippi, those from West Feliciana, those from East Feliciana, and we're going to share information and have discussions and break bread together. That's what we're going to do.
We sure are looking forward to coming.
And I thank you for the wisdom that you share. I thank you for everything. And what I will say is that we're going to trust the Almighty that with his leadership, his guidance, we're going to do great things.
Dr. Harrell, thank you from the depths of our heart. Thank you for being such an incredible Black woman. We need more like you.
I just try to do what I need to do in my time in this space while I'm in this place. You understand? Like your family left their footprints, that is what I want to do with many people like yourself who are in search of their family history. So thank you, Brother Louis Ali. It's been a great power hour of information. And to all of you, it will be live on YouTube. If you have any information about your family that you would like to share, hey, you know where you can find me. Email me at nurturingourroots@gmail.com. If you have the area that we're talking about right now, it's Amite County, Mississippi. So if you have any family history that you want to share that may be connected to this Allen family, please share it. Email me at nurturingourroots@gmail.com. Once again, Brother Ali, thank you for being a guest right here on Nurturing Our Roots.
Thank you. God bless.
Likewise, good night.